The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Matthew's Church, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the worn wooden pews. Father Michael Thompson paused mid-sentence during his sermon when the heavy oak doors creaked open. The congregation turned as one to see the German shepherd, dirty, thin, but somehow dignified, pad silently down the center aisle. "That's James Wilson's dog," someone whispered. The dog ignored the murmurs rippling through the pews. With deliberate steps he made his way to the 7th row, slipped into the exact same spot he'd occupied for the past 14 days, and settled his gaze on the empty space beside him. When Mrs. Collins tried to lead him out after service, the shepherd bared his teeth, not aggressively, but with quiet determination. Not even Richard Palmer's threats or the animal control officer's treats could move him. That night, reviewing the security footage, Father Michael's hand trembled. The shepherd wasn't just sitting there. He was waiting. And in the ghostly blue glow of the monitor, the priest witnessed something that made his blood run cold. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. James Wilson had been a fixture in Millfield since 1960 when he and his beloved wife Eleanor settled into the White Colonial on Maple Street. A decorated WI veteran who rarely spoke of his service, James was known for his quiet dignity, firm handshake, and the way he'd tip his weathered hat to every lady he passed. After Eleanor succumbed to cancer in 2010, James lived alone but never seemed lonely. He had his routines, his garden, and his faith. That changed on a bitter December morning in 2012 when James discovered a half-frozen German Shepherd puppy whimpering behind the dumpsters at Miller's Grocery. The poor creature had been doused with boiling water, his skin blistered and fur singed. "Some folks ain't fit to walk God's green earth," James had muttered to Dr. Chambers at the veterinary clinic as he paid for the puppy's treatment without hesitation, despite living on a modest pension. The dog, whom James named Rex, recovered with remarkable resilience. The scars remained, a patch of mottled skin and permanently missing fur along his muzzle, but his spirit was unbroken. From that day forward, man and dog were inseparable. Every Sunday morning, Rex would accompany James to the steps of St. Matthew's, where he'd wait patiently until service concluded, never once attempting to enter the sacred space. Father Michael Thompson had his own complicated history with dogs. At 9 years old, he'd been bitten by a neighbor's Rottweiler, leaving him with both physical and emotional scars. Though he'd never admitted openly a man of the cloth shouldn't harbor such petty aversions, he maintained a careful distance from all canines, including Rex. He would nod politely to James each Sunday, but never extended a hand to the shepherd sitting obediently at his parishioner's feet. Sarah Baker, the church administrator with kind eyes and prematurely silver hair, had always adored Rex. She kept dog treats in her desk drawer specifically for his Sunday visits. Meanwhile, Richard Palmer, the wealthiest member of the church board and owner of Palmer Real Estate, made no secret of his disdain for that mutt, citing allergies and cleanliness concerns whenever James was out of earshot. None of them could have predicted how this particular dog would soon divide their small community and ultimately change their lives forever. The last winter of James Wilson's life was particularly harsh. Snow piled in drifts against his front porch, and the wind howled through the bare branches of the maple trees lining his property. By January, the 93-year-old veteran was confined to his bed, his once strong frame now frail beneath the patchwork quilt Eleanor had made during their first years of marriage. Dr. Marcus visited twice daily, his expression growing grimmer with each check of James' vitals. "It won't be long now," he murmured to Sarah Baker, who had taken to bringing groceries and checking in on the old man. "His heart's giving out." Throughout it all, Rex maintained a steadfast vigil. The German shepherd refused to leave James's bedside except for the briefest necessary outings. He would rest his graying muzzle on the edge of the mattress, amber eyes fixed on his master's face with an intensity that unnerved even Dr. Marcus. "Never seen devotion like that," the doctor remarked. "It's like he understands." When James' breathing became labored, Rex would whine softly, nudging the old man's limp hand with his nose. When pain racked James's body, the dog would growl as if challenging the invisible enemy that dared harm his beloved master. Sarah often found herself sitting in James's worn armchair, watching the pair and wiping away quiet tears. She'd offered to take Rex home with her several times to give the animal a break, but James had smiled weakly and shaken his head. "He won't go," James whispered one evening, his voice barely audible above the ticking of the bedside clock. "And I wouldn't want him to. Having him here, it's like having a piece of Eleanor with me, both of them, looking after me right to the end." The night James passed, the temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. The hospice nurse had just left, promising to return at dawn. Sarah had wanted to stay, but James insisted she go home to her own family. Only Rex remained, curled against James' side as the old man's breathing grew more shallow. According to Dr. Marcus, who arrived first in the morning, James must have slipped away peacefully in his sleep, and when he entered the bedroom, he found Rex still pressed against his master's body, trembling but unwilling to move. It took Sarah and the doctor nearly an hour to coax the shepherd away. For 3 days following James' death, Rex refused all food. Sarah brought his favorite treats, pieces of roast chicken, even the expensive canned food from the specialty pet store in the next town over. But the dog turned his head away from every offering. He lay beside James's empty bed, occasionally rising to pace the house, searching each room as if his master might suddenly reappear. By the 4th day, Sarah was frantic enough to call Dr. Chambers, the veterinarian, who administered fluids and vitamins. "He's grieving," the vet explained. "Animals can die from broken hearts, too, you know." The day of James' funeral dawned clear and cold. St. Matthew's was packed. James had been well respected in Millfield, and nearly everyone turned out to pay their respects. Father Michael delivered a thoughtful eulogy, speaking of James's quiet faith and selfless nature, of his service to country and community. No one expected Rex to appear. Sarah had left him secured in James' house, a bowl of untouched food by the door. Yet halfway through the service, a collective gasp rose from the congregation as the German shepherd padded down the center aisle. Later, no one could explain how he'd escaped the house or made the 2-mile journey to the church. But there he was, his coat dusted with snow, moving with deliberate dignity toward the simple casket at the front of the sanctuary. Father Michael faltered mid-sentence as Rex approached. The dog sniffed once at the polished wood, then settled beside the casket with a deep sigh that seemed to echo through the hushed church. When the pallbearers later carried James to his final resting place, Rex followed, a solemn shadow. As the first shovelful of earth struck the lowered coffin, the shepherd threw back his head and howled, a sound so full of anguish that several mourners wept openly. After the funeral, Sarah again tried to take Rex home with her, but the dog slipped away in the cemetery, disappearing among the headstones. She searched until darkness fell, calling his name until her voice grew hoarse. 1 week later, on a Sunday morning, just as Father Michael began the opening prayer, the heavy church door swung open. Rex, thinner than before but walking with purpose, entered St. Matthew's Church. The congregation watched in stunned silence as he made his way to the 7th pew on the right side, James Wilson's regular seat for more than 30 years, and settled there, his gaze fixed on the empty space where his master would never sit again. Father Michael Thompson stood at the altar, Bible in hand, trying to maintain his composure as Rex settled into the 7th pew. The congregation's attention had completely shifted from his sermon to the German shepherd, who sat with almost human-like reverence in James Wilson's regular spot. A battle of emotions fought within the priest, annoyance at the disruption, concern about precedent, and something deeper he couldn't quite identify. "Let us continue," he finally said, voice strained. But throughout the remainder of the service he found his eyes repeatedly drawn to the dog, who never once fidgeted or made a sound. A better parishioner than some humans he knew. After the final hymn, as congregants filed out, many stopped to pat Rex or whisper to him. Sarah Baker approached with cautious hope, a leash in hand, but Rex evaded her grasp, retreating further into the pew. When Richard Palmer attempted to shoo the animal away with his umbrella, Rex's lips curled back to reveal teeth that had protected James Wilson's property for a decade. Palmer retreated, muttering about health codes and church dignity. "Leave him be for now," Father Michael finally instructed, surprised by his own leniency. "He's not harming anything." That afternoon the priest returned to find Rex still in place, unmoving except for his steady breathing and the occasional shift of his watchful eyes. Something about the animal's dedication unsettled him. He'd witnessed grief in many forms over his 15 years in ministry, but never quite like this. "You can't stay here," Father Michael told the dog, standing at a safe distance. "This is a house of worship, not a kennel." Rex simply looked at him with those amber eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than any animal should possess. By dusk, the priest's patience had worn thin. He called animal control, but when Officer Jenkins attempted to loop his catchpole around Rex's neck, the dog growled with such threatening intensity that the man backed away. "I've handled pit bulls less intimidating than this one, Father," Jenkins admitted. "Maybe give him some time. He's obviously grieving." That night was the first of many where Father Michael would review the security footage installed after a series of petty thefts the previous year. He watched in disbelief as Rex patrolled the church perimeter before settling back into his pew, occasionally rising to sniff at the spot where James had sat every Sunday for decades. The next morning, Rex was gone, offering Father Michael momentary relief. But as parishioners gathered for Tuesday morning prayer meeting, there was the German shepherd again, slipping through the doors and taking his now familiar position. This pattern continued each day. Rex would disappear overnight only to return for each service, not just Sundays now, but daily Mass, evening prayers, even the Wednesday night Bible study. Always silent, always watching, always in the same spot. The congregation's reaction split like a fork in the road. Some, like elderly Mrs. Abernathy, began bringing treats and whispering to the dog as if he were a four-legged saint. "He sees James' spirit," she claimed, crossing herself. "Animals know these things." Others, led vocally by Richard Palmer, demanded action. "This is unsanitary and inappropriate," he declared at the hastily called church board meeting 10 days after Rex's first appearance. "Next thing you know, we'll have cats in the choir loft and rabbits in the baptismal." Sarah Baker, normally reserved during board discussions, spoke up. "James Wilson attended this church for 63 years. He never missed a Sunday unless he was hospitalized. His tithes helped build the community center, and he volunteered for every work project until his arthritis became too severe. If his dog finds comfort here, what's the harm?" "The harm," Palmer countered, adjusting his expensive tie, "is that this sets a precedent. What's next? Bringing our parakeets to Christmas Eve service?" Father Michael, usually decisive in church matters, found himself uncharacteristically torn. His childhood fear of dogs urged caution, while his pastoral instincts sensed something profound in Rex's behavior. "I'll look into the situation more thoroughly," he promised, effectively postponing any decision. After the meeting, Sarah approached him privately. "Father, I've been trying to piece together what's happening with Rex. Did you know James sat in that exact same spot every Sunday for over 30 years, first with Eleanor, then alone after she passed?" Father Michael nodded. "Many parishioners have their preferred seats." "But there's more to it," Sarah continued. "I've been visiting James' house. The door was unlocked, and I've been leaving food for Rex. The place is immaculate, despite James being bedridden those final months. books shelved perfectly, dishes washed and put away, not a speck of dust anywhere. Perhaps his hospice nurse. I asked her. She said James insisted on maintaining the house himself almost until the end. He said it was important to keep things ready. At first I thought it was just an old man's pride, but now I wonder if there wasn't something more. Later that week, Sarah brought photographs to Father Michael's office, faded color snapshots of James as a young man in uniform standing beside an army jeep somewhere in Europe. Others showed James and Eleanor on their wedding day in 1948, their faces radiating joy, and finally more recent pictures of James and Rex, the old man throwing a ball despite his arthritis, the dog swimming in Bailey's Creek, both of them sitting on the porch swing at sunset. James rescued Rex when someone had poured boiling water over him as a puppy, Sarah explained, pointing to the scarred area on the dog's muzzle visible in the photos. The vet wasn't sure he'd survive, but James spent thousands on his treatment, money he'd been saving for a new roof. He slept on the floor beside Rex's crate during the recovery, talking to him through the night. Father Michael studied the images, particularly struck by one of James reading his Bible in his favorite chair, Rex's head resting on his knee. There was something in the old man's eyes, a peace, a completeness, that made the priest's throat tighten unexpectedly. He was devoted to that dog, Sarah said softly. And now Rex is showing the same devotion. I can't help thinking there's something sacred in that, Father. Something we should honor rather than cast out. As if on cue, the church bells chimed the hour, and like clockwork they heard the now familiar sound of nails clicking on the sanctuary floor as Rex arrived for afternoon prayers. February arrived with a vengeance, bringing biting winds and ice storms that coated Millfield in a treacherous crystal shell. Throughout it all, Rex maintained his vigil at St. Matthew's, his once lustrous coat becoming increasingly dull and his ribs more prominent beneath it. Sarah continued her efforts to feed him, but the German shepherd accepted food only sporadically and with apparent reluctance, as if sustenance were merely an inconvenient necessity. "He's wasting away," she told Father Michael one morning, her breath visible in the cold air of the church office. "I've tried everything. Premium kibble, homemade stews, even those expensive supplements Dr. Chambers recommended." Father Michael nodded, surprising himself with his growing concern for the animal. In the 3 weeks since Rex had first appeared in church, something had shifted in the priest's perception. The dog's unwavering dedication had begun to affect him in ways he couldn't quite articulate, chipping away at his long-held fears. "Have you tried leaving food at James' house?" he asked. "Perhaps he's more comfortable eating there." "I have," Sarah confirmed. "The bowls are sometimes emptied, but I'm not sure if it's Rex or the neighborhood strays. I've caught glimpses of him there, though, especially at night. He patrols the property like he's still protecting it for James." Father Michael's evolving tolerance for Rex's presence was not shared by all. Richard Palmer had escalated his campaign against the church dog, as Rex was now commonly called. He'd circulated a petition demanding the animal's removal, citing everything from allergies to religious propriety. To the priest's dismay, nearly a third of the congregation had signed it. "This isn't a petting zoo, Father," Palmer insisted during their third private meeting on the matter. "My granddaughter can't even attend Sunday school anymore because her asthma acts up. Surely the comfort of actual parishioners outweighs sentimentality over a stray dog." Father Michael had no ready answer. His theological training had covered many aspects of pastoral care, but none of his seminary professors had addressed what to do when a grieving German shepherd became a spiritual lightning rod for a divided congregation. Meanwhile, Rex's presence had attracted unexpected attention beyond Millfield's borders. A reporter from the county newspaper had written a small piece about the faithful shepherd, which was subsequently picked up by regional outlets. Soon, visitors from neighboring towns began appearing at services, smartphones in hand, hoping to capture images of the now famous dog. "This is turning into a circus," Palmer complained during a particularly tense church board meeting. "We had a family from Albany taking selfies with that mutt during communion last Sunday. Is this really what we want St. Matthew's to be known for?" Sarah, who had become Rex's most vocal advocate, countered, "People are moved by loyalty and love. What's wrong with that drawing them to church? Isn't that ultimately our purpose, to celebrate faithful devotion?" The debate raged on, with Father Michael increasingly caught in the middle. He found himself studying Rex during services, watching how the dog's eyes never wavered from that empty spot in the pew. Occasionally, Rex would tilt his head as if listening to a voice only he could hear, and the priest would feel an unexpected shiver run through him. One evening after Vespers, when the sanctuary was empty except for the two of them, Father Michael cautiously approached Rex. He stood at the end of the pew, maintaining a safe distance. "What do you see, boy?" he asked softly, feeling slightly foolish for addressing the animal directly. "What are you waiting for?" Rex turned to look at him, and for a brief moment Father Michael could have sworn there was a response in those intelligent eyes. Not just animal awareness, but something deeper. The dog turned back to the empty space, releasing a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of genuine grief. Almost without thinking, Father Michael extended his hand, the first time he had deliberately reached toward a dog since childhood. He hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly, then gently touched Rex's head. The fur was coarser than he'd expected, but warm. Rex didn't move, accepting the contact with quiet dignity. "I'm trying to understand," the priest murmured, surprising himself with the thickness in his voice. The following Sunday, the situation reached a breaking point when city officials arrived before the morning service. Clayton Matthews, Millfield's health inspector, approached Father Michael with apologetic determination. "I've received multiple complaints about an animal regularly present in a food service facility," he explained, referring to the church's practice of serving coffee and donuts after service. "That's ridiculous," Sarah interjected. "Rex doesn't go anywhere near the fellowship hall." Matthews shrugged. "Regulations are regulations. Unless this is a registered service animal, it can't be in the building when food is being prepared or served." "This is your doing," Sarah accused Richard Palmer, who stood nearby with poorly concealed satisfaction. "I'm simply concerned about public health," Palmer replied smoothly, "and following proper channels to address those concerns." The conversation was interrupted by Rex's arrival. The German shepherd patted down the center aisle as he did each day, ignoring the cluster of officials. Something about his gait seemed off, more labored than usual. But he made his way to James's pew and settled into position. "There he is now," Matthews said. "I'll need to see his vaccination records and service animal certification, or he'll have to be removed immediately." Father Michael felt a surge of unexpected protectiveness. "Mr. Matthews, we're about to begin worship. Surely this can wait until after the service?" "I'm afraid not," the health inspector insisted. "I have orders to resolve this today." What followed would later be described by witnesses in various conflicting accounts, but all agreed on the basic sequence. As Matthews and his assistant moved toward Rex, Sarah stepped between them, pleading for more time. Richard Palmer pushed forward, declaring dramatically that he would handle the situation himself. He reached for Rex's collar, a move that anyone familiar with dogs might have recognized as threatening. Rex, weakened but still protective of his space, growled a warning. Palmer, either not hearing or choosing to ignore it, grabbed for the collar. In an instant, Rex snapped, his teeth connecting with Palmer's hand. It wasn't a savage attack, more a warning bite, but it broke the skin nonetheless. Palmer's shout echoed through the sanctuary. "It attacked me! Did everyone see that? That dangerous animal attacked me in church!" Within minutes, chaos consumed St. Matthew's. Palmer demanded immediate medical attention, though the bite was little more than a scratch. Matthews called animal control, citing the incident as proof of public danger. Parishioners gathered in concerned clusters, their Sunday worship forgotten in the drama unfolding before them. When Officer Jenkins arrived with his catch-pole for the second time, Father Michael made a split-second decision that surprised even himself. "This has gone far enough," he announced, his voice carrying the authority he typically reserved for sermons. "Rex has been a respectful presence in this church for weeks. One defensive reaction when cornered doesn't change that." "Father," Palmer protested, his hand now wrapped in a bandage far more extensive than his injury warranted, "that animal is dangerous and must be put down." The words hung in the air, shocking many into silence. Put down. The finality of the phrase struck Father Michael like a physical blow. "No one is putting that dog down," Sarah declared, tears streaming down her face. "I'll take full responsibility for him. I'll adopt him officially." "It's too late for that," Matthews said grimly. "Once a dog has bitten someone, there are protocols." "Protocols that include a quarantine period and evaluation," Dr. Chambers interrupted, having been summoned by a quick-thinking parishioner. "Not immediate euthanasia. And as Rex's veterinarian, I can attest that he has no history of aggression and is current on all vaccinations." The standoff continued, with animal control eventually taking Rex away for the mandatory 10-day quarantine. Sarah followed them to the shelter, promising Rex through her tears that she wouldn't abandon him. Father Michael found himself canceling the service entirely, something he had done only once before during a Level 3 blizzard warning. In the days that followed, the story of the church dog exploded across social media and local news. Camera crews positioned themselves outside St. Matthew's, hoping to catch footage of the now infamous German Shepherd should he return. Animal rights activists established a small camp near the town's shelter, carrying signs with slogans like "Justice for Rex" and "Grief is not a crime." Richard Palmer, sensing an opportunity to position himself as a victim, gave several interviews from his sprawling Victorian home, his hands still elaborately bandaged. "I simply tried to help remove a health hazard from our place of worship," he told reporters, "and this was my reward." He confirmed that he was consulting with attorneys about possible litigation against the church. Father Michael retreated to the quiet of his study, overwhelmed by the controversy and his own conflicted feelings. His phone rang constantly with calls from parishioners, reporters, and even a Hollywood producer interested in rights to the heartwarming story with a tragic twist. Late one evening, as he sat with his Bible open but unread on his desk, Sarah called with disturbing news. "Rex has stopped eating completely," she reported, her voice ragged with exhaustion. "Dr. Chambers says he's severely dehydrated. They're giving him IV fluids, but—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "I'll be right there," Father Michael said, reaching for his coat. The county animal shelter was a stark utilitarian building on the outskirts of town. Inside, the fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows, and the smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of animals in distress. Sarah met him in the sterile lobby, her face pale and drawn. "They're letting me stay with him after hours because of his condition," she explained, leading the priest down a corridor lined with kennels. Most contained dogs who barked or whined as they passed. The noise made Father Michael tense, old fears stirring, but he followed nonetheless. Rex was in a separate area reserved for quarantined animals. The German Shepherd lay on a thin blanket, an IV line connected to his foreleg. His once alert eyes were dull, and his breathing seemed labored. He didn't lift his head when they entered, though his tail thumped weakly against the floor at the sound of Sarah's voice. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, kneeling beside him. "Look who came to see you." Father Michael hesitated in the doorway, then slowly approached. The dog looked much worse than he had just days ago, his muscle mass visibly diminished, his coat lackluster. "Dr. Chambers says it's like he's given up," Sarah explained, gently stroking Rex's head. "His body's shutting down, not from any particular disease, but from what looks like severe depression. Animals can die from grief, just like people sometimes do." Father Michael nodded, thinking of elderly couples who passed away within days of each other after decades of marriage. He'd presided over several such funerals, always moved by the mystery of bonds so deep that one heart couldn't continue beating without the other. "Could we bring him something of James here?" he suggested. "A piece of clothing with his scent, perhaps?" Sarah's eyes brightened slightly. "That's a good idea. I've been checking on the house daily, but I didn't think to bring anything here. I could go now." "You stay with him," Father Michael offered. "Just tell me what to look for and where." 20 minutes later, the priest found himself standing in James Wilson's darkened living room, feeling like an intruder despite having the key Sarah had entrusted to him. The house was precisely as she had described, meticulously maintained with everything in its place. It hardly looked like the home of a man in his 90s, let alone one who had been bedridden in his final months. In the master bedroom, Father Michael located the cardigan Sarah had described, a worn blue sweater hanging in the closet. As he carefully removed it from its hanger, he noticed a leather-bound book on the nightstand, James' journal, according to Sarah, where the old man had faithfully recorded daily entries for most of his adult life. Father Michael hesitated, respecting the privacy of the deceased, but something compelled him to open the journal to its final entries. James's handwriting had grown shaky but remained legible. "December 18, 2022. The doctor says it won't be long now. I'm not afraid of going. Lord knows I've lived a full life, but I worry about Rex. He knows something's wrong, won't leave my side even to eat unless Sarah forces him. I've asked her to take him when I'm gone, but I see the reluctance in her eyes. She's kind, but lives in that tiny apartment. No place for a shepherd. December 20, 2022. Dreamed of Eleanor last night. She was young again, standing in the light. Said she was waiting for me. I believe her. Told Rex about it this morning. Sometimes I think he understands every word." The final entry, dated January 3, 2023, just 2 days before James passed, sent a chill through Father Michael. "Can hardly hold the pen today. Rex hasn't left the bed since morning, keeps looking at the corner of the room and whining. I wonder if he sees what I've been seeing. Eleanor, standing there, smiling, waiting. Nearly time, I think. Just hope someone will look after my boy. He'll look for me, I know. Loyal to the end, that dog. Might even follow me to church if they'd let him in. Always did want to come inside instead of waiting on those steps." Father Michael closed the journal with trembling hands, the cardigan clutched to his chest. He surveyed the immaculate room one last time before turning to leave, and froze. On the dresser sat a collection of small items carefully arranged in a neat row. James's reading glasses, a handkerchief monogrammed with his initials, a worn leather wallet, his veteran service pin, and a small, smooth stone. Each object was positioned with obvious care, like artifacts in a personal museum. But what caught the priest's attention was the empty space at the end of the row, a gap that suggested another item belonged there, an item that was missing. With sudden clarity, Father Michael recalled what he had seen on the security footage that first night. The mysterious blue item Rex had carried into the church and placed on James' seat before settling beside it. Taking the cardigan and after a moment's hesitation the journal, Father Michael hurried back to the shelter. He had a growing suspicion about what had been happening in his church each day, something far more profound than a dog simply seeking shelter or attention. And for the first time since Rex had appeared in his sanctuary, Father Michael felt not annoyance or apprehension, but a sense of wonder. Father Michael returned to the county animal shelter, clutching James' blue cardigan, his mind racing. The stark fluorescent lights of the facility seemed even harsher after the quiet darkness of James' immaculate home. He found Sarah exactly where he'd left her, kneeling beside Rex, her hand gently stroking his dull coat as the German shepherd lay unnaturally still, only the slight rise and fall of his rib cage indicating life. "I found the sweater," Father Michael said softly, holding up the worn cardigan. "And something else as well." He placed James' journal on a nearby metal stool, but kept that conversation for later. Right now, the dog's deteriorating condition took precedence. Sarah took the cardigan with reverent care. "Rex," she called softly, "look what Father Michael brought you." The shepherd's eyes remained half closed, but his nostrils flared slightly as Sarah brought the garment closer. She gently placed it near his head, arranging it so that it touched his muzzle. For several moments, nothing happened. Then Rex inhaled deeply, his chest expanding as he drew in the scent of his master. A tremor ran through his body. "He recognizes it," Father Michael whispered, unexpectedly moved. They watched as Rex summoned the strength to lift his head slightly, pressing his nose into the fabric of the cardigan. The dog released a low, mournful sound, not quite a whine, not quite a howl, that raised goosebumps on the priest's arms. "It's okay, boy," Sarah murmured, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay to miss him." Dr. Chambers entered the holding area, clipboard in hand. The veterinarian's face registered surprise at finding Father Michael there, but he nodded a greeting before checking Rex's IB line. "Any changes?" Sarah asked anxiously. "His vital signs are stable, but very weak," the vet replied, his expression grave. "If he doesn't start eating soon, we'll have to consider a feeding tube. Though, honestly—" He trailed off, glancing at Father Michael as if unsure whether to continue. "Please, be direct," the priest encouraged. "Sometimes, when they've made up their minds to go, there's not much medicine can do," Dr. Chambers finished quietly. "I've seen it before with older animals who've lost their owners. It's like they've lost their purpose." Father Michael considered this, thinking of James' final journal entries. "Or perhaps they believe they have a new purpose," he suggested. "One that's leading them elsewhere." The veterinarian gave him a curious look, but didn't press for clarification. "I'll check back in an hour. The night staff has been instructed to call me immediately if there's any change." He hesitated at the door. "I should inform you that Mr. Palmer called the shelter board today. He's demanding that Rex be euthanized as soon as the quarantine period ends, citing the bite as evidence of dangerous behavior." "He can't do that," Sarah exclaimed, her hand protectively covering Rex's shoulder. "Legally, it's complicated," Dr. Chambers admitted. "As Rex doesn't have a registered owner since James' passing, and with a documented bite incident, the shelter board might feel pressured to comply, especially given Palmer's influence in the county." After the veterinarian left, Sarah turned to Father Michael with desperate eyes. "We can't let that happen. I'll adopt him right now. Fill out whatever paperwork they need." "I'm afraid it may not be that simple," Father Michael said, rubbing his forehead. "If the board has already begun proceedings—" "Then we need to change their minds," Sarah insisted. "Show them that Rex isn't dangerous, that he only reacted because Palmer provoked him." Father Michael nodded slowly, his gaze falling on the journal he'd brought. "Perhaps there's another approach. Sarah, I think it's time to call an emergency town meeting." By noon the next day, Millfield's community center was packed to capacity. The town's mayor, a stout woman with practical sensibilities named Evelyn Rodriguez, had readily agreed to Father Michael's request for a public forum, though not without raising an eyebrow at the cause. "You're telling me this entire crisis is about a dog in a church?" she had asked incredulously over the phone. "It's about much more than that," Father Michael had responded. "It's about how we honor grieving, loyalty, and community values." Now, standing at the podium facing his townspeople, the priest felt an uncharacteristic nervousness. The crowd was clearly divided, Palmer and his supporters occupying one section of folding chairs, animal advocates and Rex defenders another. Local media lined the back wall, cameras at the ready. Mayor Rodriguez opened the proceedings with a call for civil discourse before turning the floor over to Father Michael. He took a deep breath, glancing down at his notes, then setting them aside. This wasn't a sermon to be carefully crafted. This was a truth to be shared from the heart. Many of you know that for the past month, a German shepherd named Rex has been coming to St. Matthew's Church each day. He began. What you may not know is why. He recounted his discoveries from the previous night. James' journal entries, the carefully arranged personal items, the revelation that Rex had been bringing objects from the house to place on James' seat in church. Last night I reviewed all of our security footage from the past month. Father Michael continued. What I found was extraordinary. He motioned to the audiovisual technician who projected grainy nighttime images onto the large screen behind the podium. The footage showed Rex entering the empty church through the door that was left slightly ajar for ventilation. In his mouth he carried something that he carefully placed on James's regular seat. First a handkerchief, then on subsequent nights, reading glasses, a veteran's pen, and other small items belonging to his master. A murmur ran through the crowd as the meaning became clear. Rex wasn't just visiting the church, he was bringing pieces of James there, maintaining his presence in the place that had been so important to him. In 30 years of ministry, I've witnessed many expressions of faith and devotion, Father Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. But few have moved me as deeply as this dog's loyalty. Rex isn't confused or dangerous. He's fulfilling a promise, keeping vigil for the man who saved him, loved him, and shared his life with him. Richard Palmer rose from his seat, his bandaged hand held prominently in front of him. This is all very touching, Father, but sentiment doesn't change facts. That animal attacked me without provocation in a place of worship. Without provocation? Sarah challenged from her place near the front. You grabbed for him after being warned not to approach. Mayor Rodriguez rapped her gavel as the crowd's murmuring grew louder. One speaker at a time, please. Palmer continued, undeterred. Furthermore, allowing an animal inside a church sets a dangerous precedent. What's next? Parakeets in the choir loft? Cats sleeping on the altar? There are health codes and traditions to consider. I believe Jesus had something to say about valuing traditions over compassion, Father Michael responded mildly, drawing a few chuckles from the audience. Dr. Chambers stood to offer his professional assessment. I've treated Rex since he was a puppy. This dog has no history of aggression whatsoever. The bite incident was defensive, not predatory, and barely broke the skin. In my professional opinion, Rex poses no threat to public safety. The debate continued, opinions flying back and forth across the room. Father Michael noticed that even those who had initially supported Palmer's position seemed to be softening as they learned more about Rex's behavior and motivation. Then, unexpectedly, Millfield's oldest resident rose shakily to her feet. At 97, Martha Hendricks rarely attended public meetings anymore, but her presence commanded immediate respect and silence. I've known James Wilson since he came home from the war, she said, her voice thin but clear. Eleanor, too, God rest her soul. Kindest people you'd ever hope to meet. When my Harold passed in 86, James was at my door the next morning to fix my leaky roof. Wouldn't take a dime for it either. She paused, looking around the room with rheumy but sharp eyes. That dog of his, Rex, he'd come with James when he checked on me every Sunday after church. Gentlest creature you ever saw. And smart. Lord, that animal understood every word James said to him. Martha turned her gaze directly to Richard Palmer. Now you listen here, Richard. Your daddy would be ashamed of how you're acting. You want that poor animal put down because he nipped you when you scared him? Where's your Christian charity? Palmer shifted uncomfortably as murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mayor Rodriguez seized the moment to call for a straw poll. How many citizens supported allowing Rex to remain in the community, possibly even continuing his visits to the church under proper supervision? Hands rose throughout the room, not unanimously, but in significant majority. Even some who had signed Palmer's petition now voted in support of Rex. The mayor nodded, then called for those opposed to raise their hands. Palmer's support had dwindled to just a handful of stalwarts. "I believe the community's wishes are clear," Mayor Rodriguez announced. "The shelter board will be advised of this outcome, and I personally will request that any euthanasia proceedings be halted immediately." Relief washed over Sarah's face, and she reached for Father Michael's hand, squeezing it gratefully. But their victory was bittersweet. Rex still lay critical at the animal shelter, his will to live seemingly broken. As the meeting dispersed, Father Michael approached Palmer, who was gathering his coat with a sour expression. "Mr. Palmer," the priest said quietly, "might I have a word with you in private?" Palmer looked as if he'd rather walk barefoot across hot coals, but nodded curtly. They moved to a quiet corner of the now emptying community center. "I understand your concerns about church traditions and protocols," Father Michael began, "and I respect your right to express them. But you're going to ignore them anyway," Palmer interjected bitterly. "No. I'm going to ask you something personal." Father Michael took a deep breath. "Why does Rex's presence in the church truly bother you so much? It seems to go beyond concerns about precedent or allergies." Palmer's jaw tightened, and for a moment Father Michael thought he wouldn't answer. Then, unexpectedly, the man's stern facade cracked. "My wife left me because of a dog," he said, his voice barely audible. 26 years ago. She wanted to adopt this mangy stray that kept hanging around our first house. I said, no. We were just starting out. I was building my business. We didn't have time for a pet. She did it anyway, behind my back." He stared at his shoes, avoiding the priest's gaze. "We fought about it for weeks. I gave her an ultimatum, me or the dog. Never thought she'd choose the mutt." He cleared his throat. "Last I heard, she's still got that dog's descendants. Lives in Phoenix now. Never remarried." Father Michael was silent, letting the revelation sink in. Now Palmer's vehemence made sense. Rex wasn't just a dog to him. He was a symbol of profound personal loss and rejection. "I'm truly sorry for your pain," Father Michael said gently, "but denying another's comfort won't heal your own wounds." Palmer straightened, his mask of indifference sliding back into place. "Save the counseling, Father. I've made my position clear, and I've been outvoted. Democracy in action." He turned to leave, then paused. "But don't expect me in the pews if that animal is still coming to church." As Palmer walked away, Father Michael's phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice tight with urgency. "You need to come to the shelter right away," she said. "Rex has taken a turn for the worse. Dr. Chambers says—" Her voice broke. "He says we should prepare to say goodbye." Father Michael hurried to his car, his heart heavy. They had won the battle to save Rex's life, only to lose him to a broken heart. As he drove through Millfield's quiet streets toward the shelter, he found himself doing something he hadn't done since childhood. Praying specifically for a dog. The county animal shelter seemed unnaturally quiet as Father Michael rushed through its doors. The usual chorus of barks and whines from the kennels had dimmed to an occasional soft sound, as if the other animals sensed the gravity unfolding in their midst. Sarah met him in the corridor, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "His temperature's spiking," she whispered, leading him toward Rex's quarantine room. "Dr. Chambers says it's over 104 degrees now. He's having tremors." They entered to find the veterinarian adjusting an IV drip while an assistant placed ice packs around Rex's prone body. The German shepherd's breathing had become shallow and rapid, his chest heaving with the effort. James' blue cardigan remained tucked beneath his muzzle, but Rex no longer seemed aware of it. "What's happening to him?" Father Michael asked, staying back to give the medical team room to work. Dr. Chambers glanced up, his expression grim. "It's multifactorial. Dehydration, stress, malnutrition. His body's simply shutting down. But honestly, I've seen this before in animals with deep bonds to owners who've passed. It's like a profound depression that becomes physiological. Some call it broken heart syndrome. Can't you do something more? Sarah pleaded, kneeling beside Rex and stroking his flank with trembling fingers. We're doing everything medically possible, the vet assured her, genuine regret in his voice. But there comes a point where medicine has its limits. Sometimes the will to live is stronger than any treatment we can provide, and sometimes its absence is more powerful than any intervention. A convulsion rippled through Rex's body, causing Sarah to cry out in distress. The shepherd's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed with fever. He released a low whine that seemed to Father Michael to contain all the loneliness and longing a living creature could express. "I can't bear this," Sarah sobbed, burying her face in Rex's neck fur. "Please, Rex, don't give up. James wouldn't want this for you." Father Michael stood frozen, overwhelmed by the scene before him. In his years of ministry he had sat beside countless deathbeds, offering comfort and prayers to the dying and bereaved. But this was different. This was a grief so pure and uncomplicated by human complexities that it cut straight to the heart. Without conscious decision, he found himself moving forward to kneel on Rex's other side. The childhood fear that had kept him distant from dogs for decades evaporated in the face of this profound suffering. He placed his hand gently on Rex's heaving side, feeling the heat of fever beneath his palm. "Chambers," he said quietly, "would it be possible to move Rex to the church?" The veterinarian looked up in surprise. "Move him? Father, he's in critical condition. I don't recommend transporting him anywhere." "I understand the risks," Father Michael replied, sudden clarity filling him. "But I believe it might help him. Sarah said it herself. Rex is looking for James, and in his mind the church is where he last saw him, during the funeral." Dr. Chambers hesitated, glancing between the priest and the suffering dog. "Medically speaking, it's inadvisable, but," he sighed, "at this point we're fighting a losing battle anyway. If you think it might bring him some peace in his final hours, I won't object." Within 30 minutes they had carefully transferred Rex to the back of Dr. Chambers' SUV, the shepherd wrapped in blankets with his IV still running. Sarah cradled his head in her lap during the short drive to St. Matthew's, murmuring reassurances that none of them believed. The church stood silent and shadowed in the late afternoon light. Father Michael unlocked the heavy wooden doors, while Dr. Chambers and his assistant gently carried Rex on a makeshift stretcher. They placed him in the 7th pew, James' pew, where the German shepherd had maintained his faithful vigil for the past month. "I'll stay with him," Sarah promised, settling on the floor beside the pew, her hand resting on Rex's chest to monitor his breathing. "We all will," Father Michael said, surprising himself with how naturally the words came. Throughout the evening a steady stream of townspeople arrived, news of Rex's condition having spread rapidly after the meeting. They came quietly, respectfully, many bearing small offerings, a favorite dog treat, a tennis ball, a handmade blanket. Even children tiptoed down the aisle to whisper goodbye to the church dog who had captured their imaginations. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been among the first to welcome Rex's presence, brought her knitting and settled into a nearby pew. "I'll just sit with him a while," she said softly. "No one should pass alone." As darkness fell, the visitors gradually departed until only Father Michael, Sarah, Dr. Chambers, and a few dedicated souls remained. Rex's condition continued to deteriorate. The tremors had worsened, and occasionally he would cry out, a sound so mournful it brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes each time. "I need to prepare you," Dr. Chambers said quietly around midnight, checking Rex's vitals. "He's getting weaker. His organs are beginning to fail. It won't be long now." Sarah nodded, beyond words in her grief. She had barely left Rex's side, refusing food and drinking only when Father Michael insisted. The priest himself felt a profound sense of loss building within him, not just for the dog, but for what Rex represented. Faithfulness, devotion without calculation. love without reservation. In their brief acquaintance, this animal had taught him more about those virtues than many humans had managed in years. "Would it be inappropriate," Father Michael asked hesitantly, "if I were to pray over him?" Dr. Chambers smiled faintly. "I'm a scientist, Father, but I've seen enough in my practice to know there are mysteries beyond our understanding. Pray away." Father Michael nodded gratefully and moved to kneel beside Rex. The shepherd's breathing had become so labored that each inhale seemed to take tremendous effort. Gently, the priest placed one hand on Rex's head, surprised at how natural the gesture felt after a lifetime of avoiding such contact. "Lord," he began softly, "you who created all living things and breathed life into them, look with compassion on your faithful creature. You know every sparrow that falls, every hair on our heads. Surely you know this loyal heart as well." As he continued praying, something unexpected happened. Rex, who had been nearly unresponsive for hours, tilted his head slightly toward the priest's voice. His tail, motionless for so long, thumped once against the wooden pew. "He heard you," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. Father Michael continued, encouraged. "Grant comfort to this good and faithful servant, who has loved so well and shown us all what true devotion looks like." Another weak thump of Rex's tail, his eyes clouded with fever, seemed to focus briefly on Father Michael's face. The small group gathered around the pew watched in silent wonder as Rex summoned his remaining strength to lift his head. He looked beyond them toward the altar, his gaze fixing on something none of them could see. His ears perked forward slightly, the first alert posture he'd shown in days. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, following his gaze. "What do you see?" Rex whined softly, not the pained sound they'd grown accustomed to, but something different, almost hopeful. Dr. Chambers checked his watch, frowning. "It's nearly 2 a.m. His fever's still dangerously high, but his breathing seems less labored suddenly." Throughout the night they maintained their vigil. Rex's condition remained critical, but the immediate sense of imminent loss had receded slightly. By dawn, when the first pale light filtered through the stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across the worn pews, something remarkable had occurred. "His temperature's dropping," Dr. Chambers announced, studying the thermometer with disbelief. "Not dramatically, but definitely trending downward." Sarah, exhausted but refusing to leave, looked up with the first glimmer of hope. "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure yet," the veterinarian admitted cautiously. "It could be various things, but it's a positive sign." By mid-morning, Rex had shifted position slightly, a small movement that nevertheless indicated returning strength. He had accepted a few ice chips from Sarah's hand, his first voluntary consumption in days. Father Michael, who had dozed briefly in a nearby pew, awoke to find Rex's eyes open and clear, watching him. The fever glaze had diminished, replaced by something like recognition. "Welcome back, friend," the priest said softly, cautiously extending his hand. Rex's tail moved, not the single weak thump of the previous night, but a deliberate, if gentle, wag. He sniffed Father Michael's fingers, then licked them once before resting his head again. Dr. Chambers returned from his clinic with additional supplies, his eyebrows rising at the scene. "Well, our patient seems to have turned a corner." "Is he going to recover?" Sarah asked, afraid to hope too much. "It's too soon to make promises," the veterinarian cautioned. "But I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've learned never to underestimate the power of being where one wants to be. For whatever reason, Rex seems to have found something here worth fighting for." Father Michael nodded, watching the German shepherd's steady breathing. In the quiet of the church, with morning light streaming through the windows, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Whatever happened next, he knew with sudden certainty that Rex had brought something irreplaceable to St. Matthew's, a living lesson in faith, hope, and love. and for the first time in decades he found himself completely unafraid of the dog beside him. Rex's unexpected rally became the talk of Millfield. Over the next few days, the German Shepherd's condition improved steadily, if not dramatically. He began accepting small amounts of water, then broth, and finally soft food from Sarah's hand. Dr. Chambers remained cautiously optimistic, warning that the dog's recovery would be slow and possibly incomplete. "He's not out of the woods yet," the veterinarian reminded them. "His system has been through significant trauma. But I've seen miraculous turnarounds before, and this certainly qualifies." Father Michael had made the unconventional decision to allow Rex to remain in the church during his recovery. A makeshift bed had been arranged in the 7th pew, complete with James's blue cardigan and fresh blankets donated by parishioners. The church board had convened an emergency meeting to discuss the situation, but the dramatic events had softened even the most traditional members' positions. When Father Michael explained Rex's near-death experience and remarkable improvement since being brought to the sanctuary, opposition dwindled to concerned murmurs about practical matters. Sarah had taken a week's leave from her job at the local library to maintain a round-the-clock vigil. Others from the community volunteered in shifts, creating an informal rotation that ensured Rex was never alone. Father Michael observed this spontaneous organization with quiet wonder, recognizing in it something profound about human nature and our capacity for compassion. On the 4th day of Rex's residence in the church, Father Michael was sorting through correspondence in his office when Sarah knocked on his open door. She carried a cardboard box filled with papers. "I've been going through some of James' things," she explained, setting the box on his desk, "trying to get his affairs in order before the house is eventually sold. I found something you should see." From the box she withdrew a worn leather photo album and carefully opened it to a marked page. The black and white photograph showed a group of young soldiers standing beside a military jeep somewhere in Europe, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and youthful bravado, despite the obvious ravages of war surrounding them. "That's James," Sarah said, pointing to a tall, lean young man in the center. "This was taken in France in 1944, according to the notation." Father Michael nodded, studying the face of the young soldier who would later become his elderly parishioner. The resemblance was there beneath the weathering of 9 subsequent decades. The same straight nose, the determined set of the jaw. "And look at this one," Sarah continued, turning the page to reveal another photograph, this one showing James in what appeared to be a field hospital, his arm around another injured soldier. Read the caption. In faded blue ink, someone had written, "James and Thomas Thompson, after Normandy rescue, brothers in arms." Father Michael stared at the name, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "Thompson. That's your last name," Sarah confirmed. "And look at the other soldier carefully." The priest leaned closer, studying the wounded man's features. There was something hauntingly familiar in the set of the eyes, the line of the cheekbone. It was like looking at an old mirror. "That's not possible," he whispered. "I found this too," Sarah said gently, removing a stack of yellowed letters tied with twine from the box. The top envelope was addressed to James Wilson from Thomas Thompson, postmarked 1947. There are dozens of them, spanning decades. With trembling hands, Father Michael opened the first letter, his eyes immediately falling on the opening lines. "Dear Jim, not a day goes by that I don't thank God for sending you back for me in that hellhole outside St. Lou. The doctors here say I'll walk again, though the limp will be permanent, a small price to pay for a life I shouldn't still have. My son was born yesterday, 7 pounds 8 ounces of pure perfection. We named him Michael Thomas. Perhaps someday he'll meet the man who ensured his father lived to see him. Your brother in all but blood, Tom." Father Michael sank into his chair, the letter clutched in his hands. "My father," he managed finally. "James Wilson saved my father's life." Sarah nodded. "There's more. I found James' journals going back decades. He followed your career, Father. He knew exactly who you were when you were assigned to St. Matthew's 5 years ago. He even attended your installation service, though he never introduced himself as anything more than another parishioner. But why? Why wouldn't he tell me? Sarah smiled sadly. From what I've pieced together from his journals, he didn't want to complicate your life or make you feel obligated to him. He wrote that watching you serve the community was reward enough. Father Michael closed his eyes, memories flooding back. James sitting quietly in the 7th pew every Sunday, his polite nod, the way he always lingered slightly longer than others when shaking hands after the service. Had there been something more in those brief interactions that he'd missed? Some hint of the profound connection between them? "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice dropping lower. She withdrew a final item from the box, a weathered journal with the most recent dates. "James' last journal. You should read the entry from December 12th. Father Michael turned to the indicated page, finding James's increasingly shaky handwriting. "I saw Father Thompson walking Rex today when I was on my way home from Dr. Marcus's office. The good father still keeps his distance from dogs. Can't blame him after what happened with the Milligan's Rottweiler back when he was a boy. His father mentioned it in one of his letters. Funny how life circles around. The son of the man I pulled from that French ditch now shepherds the flock in my little church, and my own Rex might end up in his care if Sarah can't take him. I should tell Michael the truth before I go, but it feels too much like seeking recognition. God knows the connection. Perhaps that's enough." The realization hit Father Michael with physical force. James had known him, known his history, his childhood trauma with dogs, his father, and had respected his space all these years, never pushing, never imposing the weight of their shared history. "There's a letter as well," Sarah said quietly, producing a sealed envelope from her pocket. "It was in his Bible, addressed to you. I think he meant to give it to you eventually, but ran out of time." Father Michael accepted the envelope, his name written in shaky but determined handwriting across the front. He couldn't bring himself to open it yet, tucking it carefully into his pocket instead. "I need to check on Rex," he said, rising from his chair. He found the German shepherd awake in his pew bed, looking markedly improved. The shepherd's eyes tracked him as he approached, and his tail thumped weakly against the cushions. "Hello, old friend," Father Michael said softly, sitting beside him. "It seems we have more in common than I realized." That evening, after the volunteers had gone, and Sarah had reluctantly left to get some much-needed rest, Father Michael remained alone in the church with Rex. He sat in the pew beside the dog, James' letter still unopened in his pocket. Around them, the sanctuary settled into night sounds, the creak of old wood, the soft tick of the antique clock in the narthex, the occasional rustle as Rex shifted position. "Your master saved my father's life," Father Michael told the shepherd quietly, "which means in a way he saved mine too. All these years I never knew." Rex watched him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than animal consciousness should allow. "I've been afraid of dogs my entire life," the priest continued. "When I was 9, our neighbor's Rottweiler attacked me. 17 stitches and a lifetime of fear," he sighed. "Yet here I am, talking to you like you're an old friend." To his surprise, Rex lifted his head and shifted closer, resting his muzzle on the priest's knee. The gesture was so gentle, so deliberate, that Father Michael found his eyes filling with unexpected tears. The church's security system quietly beeped, indicating the automatic nightly activation. Father Michael remembered the footage he'd reviewed and suddenly had an idea. Moving carefully to avoid disturbing Rex, he made his way to the small security office off the main corridor. The system was basic but functional, with recordings stored on a hard drive for 30 days before automatically overwriting. Father Michael navigated to the folder containing footage from January, specifically the day of James Wilson's funeral. He found the file and began reviewing it, watching as mourners filed into the sanctuary. The camera angle captured the front rows of pews and the casket on its stand before the altar. Family and close friends, though James had few living relatives, occupied the first row. The second contained various community members. Father Michael fast-forwarded until he spotted himself entering to begin the service. Then, 18 minutes in, there was a stir among the congregation. The camera caught Rex's entrance, then, even then, moving with solemn purpose down the aisle until he reached the casket. The dog circled once, then settled on the floor beside it, his head resting against the polished wood. What struck Father Michael most was his own reaction in the footage. He had paused mid-eulogy, clearly startled, but then, instead of the fear or discomfort he would have expected from himself, he had simply nodded, acknowledging the dog's presence, and continued. He had no memory of making that decision, but there it was, documented irrefutably. Curious now, he scrolled through more recent footage, focusing on Rex's nightly visits before he'd begun staying in the church permanently. The first revelation had been the German shepherd's habit of bringing James' possessions to place on his former seat. But as Father Michael reviewed more footage, he discovered something even more remarkable. Each night Rex would carefully arrange the item he'd brought, a handkerchief, reading glasses, a veteran's pen, then settle in the pew to maintain his vigil. But as the weeks progressed, the shepherd had begun bringing these treasures to the altar before returning to the pew. It was as if he were making offerings, entrusting his master's cherished possessions to a higher care. "You've been conducting your own memorial service?" Father Michael murmured in wonder. He continued reviewing footage, moving forward to the most recent recordings before Rex's collapse. The pattern had evolved further. Rex had begun carrying each item to the altar, then to the baptismal font, and finally back to James's pew. A ritual of remembrance. Father Michael closed the security program, his mind racing with implications. He returned to the sanctuary, where Rex lay waiting, the shepherd's eyes following him as he approached. "You've been teaching me something all along, haven't you?" he said softly, taking his seat beside the dog. "About faith and remembrance, about honoring connections." He finally removed James' letter from his pocket, breaking the seal with care. The single page contained only a few sentences, in handwriting that trembled with age and infirmity. "Father Thompson, your father saved me just as surely as I saved him, by showing me through his letters what my life meant to others. The debt, if ever there was one, was paid long ago. Now, I ask only that you consider one thing. Rex will need a home when I'm gone. He has much to teach about faithfulness. Perhaps you could learn from each other. With respect and gratitude, James Wilson." Father Michael folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. He sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything he had learned. Then, hesitantly, he extended his hand to Rex. The German shepherd sniffed his fingers briefly before pressing his head against the priest's palm, an unmistakable request. Father Michael began stroking the dog's head, his touch growing more confident with each passing moment. "I think," he said quietly, "your master knew exactly what he was doing all along." That night, for the first time in his adult life, Father Michael Thompson fell asleep with his hand resting on a dog's back, the ancient fears finally beginning to loosen their grip on his heart. And as he drifted into slumber, he could have sworn he heard James Wilson's gentle chuckle echoing softly through the empty church. Spring arrived in Millfield with a gentle persistence, coaxing crocuses through the thawing earth and bringing birdsong back to barren branches. By early April, Rex's remarkable recovery had progressed beyond what even Dr. Chambers had deemed possible. The German shepherd still moved with a slight stiffness, perhaps from age, perhaps from his ordeal, but his eyes were bright and alert, his appetite restored. Sarah had formally adopted Rex, completing the paperwork at the county animal shelter with tears of joy. Though the German shepherd now lived in her small apartment above the town library, their daily routine invariably included a visit to St. Matthew's Church. where Rex would sit quietly in the 7th pew, occasionally greeting parishioners with dignified acceptance of their affection. On the Sunday marking the 3rd month since James Wilson's passing, Father Michael dedicated the service to themes of faithfulness and unexpected connections. As he delivered his sermon, he couldn't help but notice Rex sitting attentively beside Sarah, his amber eyes following the priest's movements with what seemed like understanding. Real faith, Father Michael told his congregation, isn't always found where we expect it. Sometimes it comes to us in forms we never anticipated, teaching us lessons we didn't know we needed to learn. After the service, a small crowd gathered in the fellowship hall for the unveiling of a project that had consumed the community for weeks. Sarah, as head of the committee, stood beside a large display board covered with a cloth. "As many of you know," she began, "when we sorted through James Wilson's affairs, we discovered something remarkable. Though he lived modestly, almost frugally, James had accumulated considerable savings over his long life, and in his will he left specific instructions." She nodded to Father Michael, who stepped forward to remove the cloth, revealing architectural renderings of a modern single-story building, surrounded by fenced play areas and shaded walking paths. "The James Wilson Memorial Animal Shelter," Father Michael announced, "to be built on the 3 acres James owned at the edge of town, using the funds he specifically set aside for this purpose." Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered parishioners. Even Richard Palmer, standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, gave a reluctant nod of acknowledgement. "Construction begins next month," Sarah continued. "The facility will provide temporary homes for abandoned and abused animals while they await adoption, with a special focus on rehabilitating those who've suffered trauma, just as Rex once did." As if aware he was being discussed, the German shepherd who had been resting near Sarah's feet rose and approached the display. He studied the renderings for a moment, then returned to Sarah's side, tail wagging gently. "I think he approves," someone called out, eliciting warm laughter. After the crowd dispersed, Father Michael found himself alone in the sanctuary with Sarah and Rex. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the worn wooden pews. He watched as the German shepherd moved with calm purpose to James's spot and settled there, not with the desperate vigilance of months past, but with peaceful remembrance. "He still misses him," Sarah observed, "but it's different now, less painful somehow." Father Michael nodded. "Grief evolves if we let it. It never disappears entirely, but it can transform into something that honors rather than haunts us." "Speaking of transformation," Sarah said with a small smile, "I noticed you didn't flinch when Mrs. Abernathy's grandson brought his beagle puppy to the Easter egg hunt last week." Father Michael laughed. "One step at a time. I'm not volunteering at the shelter just yet, but—" He reached down to stroke Rex's head, a gesture that had become surprisingly natural. "I've been considering getting a fish." This drew a genuine laugh from Sarah. "A fish? Well, I suppose that's progress." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small group of visitors, a young family the priest didn't recognize, with 2 wide-eyed children clutching a newspaper clipping. "Excuse me," the father said hesitantly. "We drove up from Harrisburg. Our son saw the story about the church dog, about Rex, and hasn't stopped talking about it. He's been having a hard time since his grandfather passed, and something about this story really touched him." The younger child, a boy of perhaps 7, approached Rex cautiously. "Is it okay if I pet him?" Sarah glanced at Father Michael, then nodded. "Rex is very gentle, but it's best to let him come to you. Just sit quietly on the pew and let him decide." The boy did as instructed, perching on the edge of the 7th pew with expectant patience. Rex studied him for a long moment before rising and moving closer, sniffing the child's outstretched hand. Then, to everyone's surprise, the German shepherd rested his head gently on the boy's knee, the exact gesture he had often shown with James. "He's saying hello," the boy whispered, his face alight with wonder. Something about the scene, the child's innocent acceptance, Rex's intuitive kindness, the sunlight streaming through colored glass, struck Father Michael as profoundly sacred. This wasn't just a dog comforting a grieving child. It was a continuation of something James Wilson had started, a legacy of compassion passing from one generation to the next. In the weeks that followed, more visitors came to St. Matthew's specifically to meet Rex. Father Michael found himself embracing this unexpected ministry, recognizing how the German Shepherd's story opened hearts that traditional sermons might never reach. As summer approached, the groundbreaking ceremony for the James Wilson Memorial Animal Shelter drew the largest crowd Millfield had seen in decades. Local news outlets covered the event, capturing the moment when Rex, wearing a special blue bandana, ceremonially dug the first shovelful of earth alongside Mayor Rodriguez. James Wilson lived among us quietly for over 60 years, Father Michael told the assembled crowd. Many of us thought we knew him, the elderly veteran who attended church faithfully, tended his garden, and walked his dog through town. But we've discovered that James' legacy runs deeper than we imagined. He recounted the story of James saving his father's life during World War II, the decades of correspondence between them, and James' deliberate choice to remain in the background rather than claim recognition. And then there's Rex, Father Michael continued, gesturing to the German Shepherd sitting attentively beside Sarah, who taught us about a kind of faithfulness that transcends words, who reminded us that grief is the price we pay for love, but never its conclusion. A year to the day after James Wilson's passing, St. Matthew's held a special memorial service. The sanctuary was filled beyond capacity, with folding chairs set up in the aisles to accommodate visitors from surrounding communities. Rex, now firmly established as Sarah's companion, but unofficially considered the church's mascot, wore a dignified new collar with a small medallion bearing James's initials. After the service, a procession made its way to the cemetery where James was buried. Father Michael led the way, with Sarah and Rex walking beside him. At the gravesite, they found a surprise waiting for them. A new headstone had been installed beside the original, this one featuring a simple engraving of a German Shepherd alongside the words, James Wilson, 19302023, and his faithful friend Rex. Greater love hath no man. Who did this? Sarah asked, her voice catching. Richard Palmer stepped forward from the crowd, looking somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. I thought it was appropriate, he said simply. My company donated it. Father Michael nodded his thanks, too moved for words. The transformation in Palmer over the past year had been nearly as remarkable as Rex's recovery. A gradual softening from bitter opposition to grudging respect, and finally to this unexpected gesture of reconciliation. Rex approached the headstone, sniffing it curiously before settling down beside it, his position mirroring the engraved image with uncanny precision. I think James would be pleased, Martha Hendricks remarked, leaning heavily on her cane but insistent on attending despite her advancing years. He never wanted recognition for himself, but he would have appreciated Rex being honored. As the group began to disperse, Father Michael remained behind with Sarah and Rex. The German Shepherd eventually rose, giving the headstone one final glance before walking between them toward the cemetery gates, his stride purposeful and dignified. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully as they followed, when I first started bringing Rex to your office after James died, I was just trying to find him a home. I never imagined that he'd find a home for all of us, Father Michael finished with a smile. In a way, that's what he's done, created a community where there were just individuals before. Back at the church, they found Dr. Chambers waiting with exciting news. The animal shelter construction was ahead of schedule, with a grand opening planned for early fall. Already neighboring counties had expressed interest in the rehabilitation programs being developed, particularly for animals who had suffered abuse or abandonment. "We're going to have a special Rex wing for senior dogs," the veterinarian explained enthusiastically. "Older animals often get overlooked in shelters, but they have so much love to give. We want to match them with people who will appreciate their dignity and wisdom." Father Michael watched as Rex settled comfortably in what was now referred to by everyone as his pew. The German shepherd no longer stared endlessly at the empty space beside him, but seemed content in his new role. Part church ambassador, part therapy dog for grieving visitors, part living testament to a bond that transcended even death. "You know," Father Michael told Sarah quietly, "I used to think faith was primarily about believing the right things, but Rex has taught me it's more about faithfulness. Showing up day after day, being present even when it's painful, loving without reservation." Sarah smiled, her hand resting gently on Rex's head. "James would say you've learned the most important lesson of all." As evening shadows lengthened across the sanctuary, Rex lifted his head, ears perked toward the altar as if hearing something beyond human perception. For a brief moment his tail wagged with the excitement of recognition. Then he settled back, sighing contentedly, at peace with whatever he had sensed. Father Michael didn't claim to know what the German shepherd might have perceived in that moment, but in the golden light of the setting sun, with Rex's steady presence beside them, he felt certain that some connections truly were eternal. In the sacred silence of St. Matthew's Church we witness a truth many of us understand all too well, that loyalty transcends language, that grief knows no species, and that connections forged in love never truly break. Rex's devotion to James reminds us of the invisible threads that bind us to those we've lost, parents who shaped us, spouses whose absence we feel daily, friends who left too soon. Like Rex, we too sit in empty places, sometimes bringing treasured mementos to keep memories alive. Father Michael's journey from fear to compassion mirrors our own midlife reckonings with long-held barriers. The revelation of James saving Michael's father shows how our lives interconnect in ways we may never fully comprehend, how acts of courage ripple across generations. As we enter life's autumn season, Rex's story speaks directly to our hearts. It's never too late to heal old wounds, to open ourselves to unexpected connections, or to honor those we've lost through how we live today. Perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves in our golden years is Rex's kind courage, the willingness to keep showing up day after day at the places that matter, faithful to the end. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.